Picture slavery as a Southern-only soap opera. Plantations, cotton fields, and the occasional mint julep. Gentlemen in white suits lounging under moss-draped oaks. But hold the slow banjo riff. This drama's plot twists don't stay below the Mason-Dixon line. Surprise. Slavery had credits rolling far into the North. New York? Not just bagels and Broadway. It had slaves, too. No tap dancing around that inconvenient truth. The northern states did phase out slavery eventually, but not because they suddenly developed halos. Take New Jersey. It clung to its last enslaved person until after the Civil War, proving they hold grudges longer than they hold traffic jams. If slavery were a franchise, it'd be more Starbucks than Waffle House, sprouting up coast to coast, not just down south. Zoom out globally, and the body count climbs. Brazil and the Caribbean imported millions more enslaved Africans than the U.S. Meanwhile, European empires kept their hands sticky in the slave trade jar. Northern banks? They financed so much of it, they practically invented money laundering before cash was even dirty. So adjust your lens. Slavery didn't just build fortunes, it built infrastructure across the hemisphere. When it came to the profits, everyone got a deeply tainted slice of the pie. Understanding where slavery occurred helps clarify misconceptions about terms like the Underground Railroad. All aboard the Myth Express! But before you start hunting for hidden train tracks behind bushes or lining up at phantom ticket booths, let's clear the smoke. Many envision the Underground Railroad as a secret subway, a midnight Amtrak chugging under cornfields with freedom fighters waving from the windows. Spoiler alert, the only tunnels here are the metaphorical kind. Harriet Tubman wasn't pulling levers in a striped engineer's cap, though she did mastermind some legendary escapes. So why call it a railroad? Because Underground Railroad was brilliant code for a secret web of safe houses and brave helpers. Guides were conductors, hiding spots were stations, and those seeking freedom were passengers. Borrowed straight from railroad lingo, it was puzzling enough to baffle eavesdroppers and leave pursuers scratching their heads. Truth bomb. No rails, no smokestacks, no midnight train whistles, just courage, coded signals, and fierce determination. The underground part meant secrecy, not miners' helmets or tunnels. Yet this train track tall tale keeps chugging along, popping up in pop culture and occasionally on the shelves of confused classrooms with model trains in tow. While the Underground Railroad was not a literal railroad, it symbolizes the active resistance of enslaved people. Picture this. Every enslaved person just sighing, shrugging, and embracing their misery. That's the Hollywood myth, right? If you think slaves just went with the flow, you might also believe cats actually listened to their owners. The idea that enslaved people were all submissive, heads down, and spirits broken is about as reliable as a 1693 weather forecast. In truth, resistance wasn't a rare spark. It was the daily grind. From fiery uprisings, hello Nat Turner turning up the heat in 1831, to subtler acts of rebellion, enslaved folks wrote the book on pushback. Passive acceptance? Only if you're counting breaking tools, faking illness, and work slowdowns as the 19th century equivalent of extreme yoga. And let's not forget coded songs, folklore, and spirituals. Basically encrypted group chats where every verse screamed defiance. Escape was its own Olympic sport. Harriet Tubman was the Michael Phelps, leading legions of unsung champions to freedom. Resistance, both physical and cultural, preserved dignity long before #activism was even a twinkle in social media's eye. Recognizing resistance challenges the notion that all white Americans supported slavery. Picture every white American in the antebellum South lounging with mint juleps, eagerly passing around pro-slavery pamphlets. Simple, right? Not quite. The popular notion that all white Americans cheered for slavery is about as accurate as calling a Confederate hat a good sunshade. It flattens history and wipes out nuance. Sure, many Southern whites, especially those rocking the biggest porches and snazziest waistcoats, did support, profit from, or at least turn a blind eye to slavery. But hold up, millions of Northern whites loathed the institution and made plenty of noise about it, wielding everything from sermons to pitchforks. John Brown, ring any bells? Down south, a large swath of poor whites couldn't afford the buy one, get free labor deal and often resented the plantation elite as much as anyone else. Meanwhile, abolitionist squads were a diverse gang: Northern whites, free Black Americans, and immigrants all firing shots for freedom. Politics and churches didn't exactly host kumbaya sessions. This was a full-on culture clash. And the Civil War? Think of it as an explosive 1860s group chat that spiraled wildly out of control. So no, not every white American in the 1800s was a cartoon villain twirling a mustache or jingling plantation keys. Misconceptions about supporters of slavery sometimes lead to false beliefs about how enslaved people were treated. The classic, "we treated them like family" defense. The same tired line your neighbor trots out when their dog turns your mail into a chew toy. It's the myth that just won't quit, enslavers playing benevolent patriarchs, doling out lectures and leash laws with a smile, all for your own good. This bedtime story gained popularity after the Civil War, a nostalgia-fueled lullaby for those longing for the Old South. But let's fact-check this fairy tale. Enslaved people weren't family. They were property, with fewer rights than your neighbor's mail-munching mutt. Family ties? Well, separating parents from children and spouses from one another was standard procedure. If that's how they treated family, Thanksgiving must have been a nightmare no one wanted an invite to. The truth? Enslaved labor powered profits, not potlucks. Abuse, violence, and dehumanization were the true family values on offer. And whenever survivors got to speak, they shredded this myth faster than you can say, "bought and sold for extra sugar." So here's a thought. Let's retire the fairy tale and start telling the real history. Family reunions not included. Understanding treatment of enslaved individuals connects to the broader timeline of slavery's end, including the Emancipation Proclamation. If only ending slavery were as easy as issuing a memo, America could have saved itself a heap of trouble and postponed school projects for generations. Popular myth has it that Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and voila, one presidential scribble, and gone was slavery, just like magic. If only bureaucracy worked with such sparkle and wand-waving. Here's the reality check. The Emancipation Proclamation, dropped in 1863, only freed slaves in states actively rebelling against the Union. Loyal border states? They got to keep their enslaved populations. Awkward family dinners suddenly became even more tense. Plus, many enslaved people didn't actually taste freedom until Union troops marched in to enforce Lincoln's historic decree. Think Juneteenth vibes, not immediate New Year's fireworks. If the Emancipation Proclamation had a Yelp review, it'd probably score 4 stars. Great intention, patchy coverage. The truth? The proclamation freed slaves precisely where Lincoln had no real power, like telling your neighbor to stop their dog from barking. The real legal mic drop? The 13th Amendment in December 1865. Consider the proclamation the crucial group chat announcement, important but meaningless if no one actually reads or acts on it. Knowing how slavery ended sheds light on who was involved in the abolition movement. History books often paint the fight against slavery as a gentleman's club, strictly no women allowed. Spoiler alert, that's a myth as outdated as powdered wigs. The usual tale casts men as lone heroes of abolition, with women politely handing out lemonade, or more accurately, waiting on the sidelines, needles ready for proper ladies' work. Turns out, manpower was seriously missing a dose of woman power. Early abolitionist groups tried to shuffle women into supporting roles, if they let them in at all. But Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, and the Grimke sisters? They aren't background extras. They're superheroes without capes, but with plenty of grit. These women organized conventions, raised funds, published pamphlets, and made so much noise you could hear it all the way to the Capitol. Some men thought women should stick to knitting. Little did they know, women were carefully nitpicking the entire system apart. If men were the face of abolition, women were the backbone, the feet, and the brains. They didn't just serve tea at the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society, they brewed the entire revolution. Exploring abolitionists' roles prompts examination of slavery's roots, including its connections to race. When people picture history, they sometimes imagine slavery as an outrageously exclusive VIP club, strictly skin color coded. But let's pull back the velvet rope, because this gruesome club originally had a much looser guest list. The popular myth? Slavery was always a race-based horror show, exclusively targeting people of African descent. The reality? Early slavery's PR was a hot mess, Ancient Greeks and Romans enslaved anyone unlucky enough to cross their path. Their HR policy? Hiring war captives, failed debtors, or unlucky neighbors. Skin color? Nobody asked. If their customer service line existed, it'd start, "May I ask your social status? Not your shade?" Medieval Europe stirred in its own bland flavor. Serfdom and outright slavery often hinged on religion, class, or just plain bad luck. It wasn't until the transatlantic slave trade that skin color morphed into the official, horrific dividing line. Enter pseudoscience, the worst rebranding team in history, permanently stamping race-based slavery like a tragic corporate logo. Acknowledging race-based slavery also challenges myths about the skills and education of enslaved people. Picture a colonial plantation where the only thing growing faster than the crops was the myth that enslaved people knew nothing but hard labor. Popular stereotypes painted them as unskilled and uneducated, as if everyone's ancestors were magicians who conjured wealth with nothing but a whip. Reality check. Many enslaved Africans arrived armed with farming techniques, blacksmithing tricks, carpentry know-how, weaving skills, and the stamina to survive a boat ride you definitely wouldn't book on Airbnb. And let's not buy the fairy tale that American trades were gifts from kindly white masters. Enslaved people became mechanics, cooks, midwives, seamstresses, and boatmen, basically dominating the colonial LinkedIn skills list. Some even taught themselves and others to read, despite laws claiming books were bosses only. If you think enslaved folks were illiterate by default, maybe double-check your own library card. Plantations, and whole cities, leaned so heavily on this expertise that some slaveholders' greatest skill was simply asking for help. After emancipation, all that knowledge sparked black schools, businesses, and communities. The ultimate comeback story, powered by talent no whip could ever whip away. Understanding enslaved people's abilities contrasts with beliefs about universal racial participation in the slave trade. Imagine a global potluck where everyone brings their absolute worst dish. Now swap casseroles for centuries of human suffering. At this ghastly soiree, whispers circulate that everyone pitched in equally to the horror show known as the transatlantic slave trade. Guilt was apparently doled out like party favors, each guest leaving clutching their own sad little bag of shame. But history flips that script. The head chefs? The European powers, Portugal, Britain, Spain, France, and the Netherlands, serving up a continent-sized conveyor belt of misery. Sure, some African kingdoms and traders played a part, some eager, others more pointed at with a gunboat, but their roles were a chaotic patchwork compared to Europe's polished assembly line. Asia and indigenous Americans? They mostly got left off the guest list for this particular Atlantic horror show. Here's the kicker. The biggest profits, the slave ships, the imperial muscle, all proudly flying European flags. Claiming this was equal opportunity oppression is like insisting the World Cup was won by every team equally, when really, a handful of colonial empires hogged the trophy for awfulness. And let's be real, blaming everyone equally just hands the real masterminds a get-out-of-jail-free card. Examining who participated in the slave trade links to broader debates about the causes of the Civil War. If you think the Civil War boiled down to a spirited dispute over state taxes and Southern charm, bless your heart. But history's got the receipts, and they don't lie. There's a neat little myth floating around that the war sprang from tariff tiffs, states' rights squabbles, or some heated debate over whether Uncle Sam should rock stripes or plaid. But crack open the actual secession documents, the South's own awkward breakup letters, and guess what? Slavery is front and center, starring as the main event. And spoiler, they weren't exactly whispering about it. Folks love waving the states' rights banner, but let's get real. States' rights to do what, exactly? Spoiler alert, it wasn't so they could host untaxed backyard barbecues. The hot-button right was the right to own people, plain and simple. When Lincoln got elected, the panic wasn't about slashing taxes. It was about stopping slavery's expansion. Confederate leaders were upfront about this, and unlike a lousy magician, made zero effort to distract. Southern grumbles about northern states not returning fugitive slaves? That just makes the whole states' rights excuse wobble even harder. Turns out rights only mattered when they served slaveholders' interests. Tariffs and taxes? Not even in the top 5 reasons. If the Civil War wasn't about slavery, Then the Titanic sank because first-class cocktails had too much ice. Clarifying the Civil War's connection to slavery helps differentiate experiences like those of indentured servants and enslaved people. Picture a plantation where everyone's misery is somehow created equal, but only in the owner's daydreams. There's a persistent myth, carefully concocted to tidy up history's messy kitchen, that indentured servants and enslaved people endured identical hardships. Reality? Indentured servants had contracts. Enslaved people got, let's say, a far less generous HR package, no PTO, and zero chance of promotion. Indentured servitude was grueling. Contracts, signed or strong-armed, tied folks down for about 4 to 7 years. If they survived disease, hunger, and whippings, those unlucky interns might earn freedom, and maybe even a patch of land. Enslaved Africans and their descendants? They got a life sentence, passed down boardroom style to their kids, with legal rights somewhere below those of a stray sheep. One group could fantasize about finishing their sentence. The other's only parole officer was the Grim Reaper in a bad mood. See the difference? One system ends with a handshake and a good luck out there. The other? Generational trauma served daily. Equating these setups just muddles the lines between two wildly different brands of oppression. Historically neat, but ethically a hot mess. Comparing these experiences also highlights the ongoing relevance of slavery beyond ancient history. Think slavery is a sepia-toned relic, tucked away with dusty pharaohs and ancient scrolls? Think again. Most folks imagine it ended the moment Abraham Lincoln scribbled his name on the Emancipation Proclamation, or perhaps after a particularly stern British parliamentary tea party. Nowadays, the only chains we picture are shiny gold necklaces or fast food joints. Spoiler alert, not everyone's that lucky. Here's the gut punch. Modern slavery is alive and kicking, sneaking around in clever disguises. Human trafficking, forced labor, debt bondage, you name it. If you believe slavery packed its bags with top hats and telegrams, I have a quill pen and some snake oil to sell you. Brace yourself. About 50 million people worldwide are trapped in slavery right now. That's more than the population of Canada, all glued together by exploitation. And it's not just somewhere else. Modern slavery lurks behind your chocolate, your clothes, even your smartphone. See any made with 100% free-range labor stickers? Exactly. Thanks to tangled supply chains and euphemistic labels, most of us stay blissfully ignorant. Sure, there's legislation, activism, and ethical shopping, but results are as mixed as a bargain bin trail mix. Calling slavery history isn't just wrong, it's helping it stick around for the sequel. Ready to look closer? Understanding slavery's enduring impact challenges views about the work enslaved people performed. Picture every historical movie. Endless fields of cotton, everyone dressed in drab linen, sweating under a sun hot enough to fry an egg. Hollywood wants you to believe every enslaved person wielded a hoe, but that's a sprawling overgeneralization. In reality, many enslaved folks worked in bustling cities, as cooks, blacksmiths, carpenters, or factory hands. Domestic enslavement? Also a thing. Childcare, cleaning, and the Herculean task of picking up after their enslavers' children, pets, and egos alike. Apparently, the enslaved career fair offered gigs from chef to craftsman, with zero salary and absolutely no health benefits. Cities depended on this forced labor. Ports, shipyards, warehouses all hummed thanks to enslaved workers. Some endured brutal jobs in mines, lumber camps, and canal projects. Bottom line? Plantation life was just one grim chapter. The whole story is jam-packed with roles that deserve a far more nuanced and respectful historical script. Recognizing the variety of enslaved people's work relates to the complex legal landscape of free and slave states. Imagine the U.S. as a giant checkerboard, black squares for slave states, white for free states. No gray areas allowed, right? If only colonial lawmakers had bothered to don color-coded jerseys, Team Liberty versus Team Chains. Popular myth paints early America as neatly sorted, but in reality, the borderlands looked less like a tidy game and more like a Jackson Pollock canvas. Wild, chaotic, and leaving plenty of room for argument. Take New Jersey. It passed gradual emancipation, which sounds promising until you realize it's emancipation in slow motion, like a state-sponsored marathon for taking forever. People remained enslaved there well after the Civil War kicked off. Meanwhile, free states found loopholes slipperier than a greased pig, keeping forced labor on life support through apprenticeships or by turning a blind eye to visiting slaveholders. Territories? No clearer, with patchwork laws as unpredictable as a toddler's mood swings. Toss in the Missouri Compromise and those frantic attempts to keep the balance. It's basically Congress playing legislative twister. History craves neat categories, but reality revels in messy, inconvenient, fascinating footnotes. Step aside, checkerboard. Bring on the splotches. Appreciating this complexity underscores the fact that slavery's end did not bring instant improvement for all. Imagine flipping a switch and, poof, all society's deepest problems vanish faster than socks in a dryer. Feels good, right? Back in 1863, many thought exactly that happened when Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Slavery gone! Problem solved? Or, so the fairy tale goes. The myth of the magic paper fix is as stubborn as a pop-up ad on a slow connection. Reality check. The Emancipation Proclamation was more some assembly required than instant freedom. It freed enslaved people only in rebellious Confederate states, meaning plenty remained in chains elsewhere. The real legal freedom didn't show up until the 13th Amendment, and even then, the fine print had more asterisks than a bad Yelp review. Forced labor for prisoners, anyone? America, where you can lose your chains and get handed a bill. But wait, there's a sequel? Sharecropping, black codes, and outright violence popped up, proving injustice isn't gone, it just changes costumes, like racism on a quick change stage, because nothing screams happily ever after like inventing new forms of oppression. Turns out, society wasn't so much remade as slapped with a fresh coat of paint, same old mess underneath.